Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Lance French. I'm the Marketing Director with W&M Environmental, and we'd like to welcome you to our webinar on the TCEQ Stormwater Permit Changes. I'd like to introduce our speakers, W&M's Heather Woodward and Jennifer Adams. Welcome, Heather and Jennifer.
Thanks, Lance.
Thanks, Lance.
Good. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. We want this to be as interactive as we can. If you have questions, use your tab in your webinar window, and we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. This is our largest webinar that we've ever had. So I just want to let you guys know if we don't get to your questions right away, I will make sure that we get the list of questions to Heather and Jennifer, and they will be answered as quickly as possible. We are recording this webinar, and it will be posted on our website, and I'll be sending you guys a link to that later on this afternoon, along with the presentation slides. So Jennifer, I'm going to start with you with our first question. Oh, Heather, I'm sorry, I'm going to start with you on the first question. So what is the objective of stormwater permitting?
Thanks, Lance. Jennifer, if you'll flip slides. There we go, the next one. So I wanted to let everybody know that for the first few slides, questions are going to be background information that probably most of you already know, but what we're trying to do is just kind of set the framework for how the changes affect what's already in place and make sure that everybody's on the same page with what the objectives of stormwater permitting are and why they're important. So basically, the biggest reason for stormwater pollution prevention permitting across the board is because the waters running off our properties do not get treated the way sanitary sewer water is treated before it's discharged to a stream, river, or lake. So whatever pollutants run off your property wind up being discharged directly to a surface water body and can affect aquatic life and also just the natural enjoyment of those water bodies. Next slide. So this concept isn't new. The Clean Water Act's been in place since 1972, trying to work on improving the water quality in our country. The first phases of the industrial stormwater permit started in 1990 and has been evolving ever since. And so this within Texas is just the next evolution of this process.
Okay, so Jennifer, what are the different types of stormwater permits?
So I like to give a preface for this question with what's the difference between stormwater and process water. So I have a little simple test I do to figure out what process water versus stormwater is. It's very high level, very easy, but I call it the dry day test. Basically, any water that's present on your site on a dry day will usually be considered process water. You know, water that you use to wash in your roads, your trucks, basically any water that is used in your process. Obviously, the TCEQ has a much more technical definition that you should go by, but this is my good initial determination. So then stormwater, industrial stormwater in this case, is any water, very simple, any water that comes from the sky and runs through exposed industrial material at your site. And of course, this webinar, the TXR5 permit that we're looking at today, that is a stormwater permit, and it only allows industrial stormwater discharges with very few non-stormwater discharges exceptions. A couple other permits out there. We have the construction stormwater permit, the TXR15, which covers runoff at a site during construction. There's several industry-specific wastewater discharge permits that the TCEQ has developed, such as the TXG11 permit for concrete plants, specific to concrete plants, that allows discharge of both process and stormwater. If you discharge industrial wastewater into or adjacent to a water of the state and aren't covered by one of the industry-specific stormwater or wastewater permits, you will be required to get an individual TPDES permit through the TCEQ. And then, of course, the MS4 permit just authorizes municipalities to come inspect your sites.
Okay, Heather, so to To whom does the TXR05 Industrial MSGP apply?
So next slide. So the MSGP applicability is based on your standard industrial classification code. So hopefully all of you know what your SIC code is for your activities, and it's based on the primary SIC code for your facility. The SIC codes are grouped together into what's called sectors. The sectors are grouped based on common activities, potentially common pollutants. And so then within your sector you will have certain specific requirements. Some facilities may have more than one SIC code at their facilities. There's the primary SIC code, which is typically determined based on what is the largest activity or the largest revenue generator at the facility, and then any other supporting things. So for example, in the mining industry, they may be subject to one sector, but they have vehicle equipment and washing activities that may be subject to a different type of sector and SIC code. So you have a primary and a secondary, and the permit applicability is based on the primary one, but you may have pockets that also have to comply with some of the secondary requirements. So that's the biggest, most common way people get pulled in, and it's typically manufacturing or industrial activity sites. Then there's some based on activity codes, so those are not so much as an SIC, but a type of activity occurring on site. And then some lucky people can be pulled in just because the executive director decides they should be covered, and they go under Sector AD. So those are the common ones. And also, if you're a military installation and you have these SIC code activities at your facility, then you are also subject. So I've been talking about industrial activities. Jennifer's also mentioned it. So industrial activities can be a laundry list of things, and they're all listed out in the MSGP, so you need to take a look at those. But they include things like storing materials outside, performing manufacturing activities or maintenance activities outside, or loading and loading activities. There's a whole bunch more, but those are some of the most common ones. And if you have an industrial activity exposed to stormwater, then you have to prepare a stormwater plan and submit a notice of intent. And just be sure that you realize that the SWIP is supposed to be prepared and implemented prior to submitting your notice of intent. So you can't wait until the last day and decide, oh, I got to write a SWIP and submit an NOI, or submit the NOI and then go, oh, now I need to write a SWIP. It really needs to go cart before the horse. Actually, cart after the horse, with the SWIP first and the NOI next. If for some reason you don't have any industrial activities outside that come in contact with stormwater, you can potentially apply for a no exposure certification. You need to make sure that all your industrial materials and activities are protected by a storm-resistant shelter. And one of the common things that we see is people will have an awning over stuff and say, hey, that's a storm-resistant shelter, but they haven't considered wind-blown rain. So you need to make sure that you also consider wind-blown rain and running across the bottom parts of that stored material or activity. So be sure to make sure to look at that. The TCEQ has some good guidance documents. There's a lot of clarification on that in the MSGP itself, so make sure you look for that. RG 467 is the one that the TCEQ has.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. So Heather, what does an industry have to do to comply?
So there's quite a few steps to this. These are kind of listed out here in a nice manner. I'm not going to talk to each one of the steps, assuming that you can come out and read through these on your own. But basically, you need to prepare your SWIP. You need to identify what kind of things could cause stormwater pollution, identify your best management practices or your controls, create your SWIP, and then submit your NOI. And then you're going to have ongoing maintenance activities. Just because you prepared it now, it's a 5-year plan, and it will change and grow and expand your operations do. So make sure you maintain it and conduct all your routine sampling and monitoring. So basically, we've talked a lot about a SWIP, and the stuff that I'm listing here isn't new or different from the 2011 to the 2016. The fundamentals are basically the same, but there are specific changes to different regulatory areas, different sections of the SWIP or the requirements that Jennifer will be going through in a little bit, so I'm not going to go over those. But just to give you guys an idea, these are the minimum requirements that you have to do to prepare a SWIP and have to include within your stormwater plan. You have to have a team, you have to do a narrative description of your site, and you need to have site maps and figures, and there are very specific things that have to be included in the narrative and the site maps and figures, so make sure you look at those specifics. You have to have identified your pollutants and sources and what kind of control measures you're going to put in place to protect those. And then you have to be sure that you have spill response procedures in place, and don't forget that if you have a spill response procedure that you need to have your spill kits in place to respond accordingly. Then there's certain monitoring and inspection requirements and employee training. And don't forget documentation. If you haven't documented it, as far as the TCEQ is concerned, you haven't done it, so make sure everything's documented. Next slide. So the next part of it is after you prepare your plan, you have specific requirements on an ongoing basis. You have quarterly and annual routine inspections. They're required to be done by qualified people who are familiar with the SWIP and the activities performed at your facility. And then you have certain stormwater monitoring where you have to actually get out in your galoshes and your raincoat and go grab a stormwater sample. And they include quarterly visual monitoring, and every sector and everybody has to do quarterly visuals. There's no waiving out of that. And then semi-annual benchmark for certain sectors, and annual hazardous metals sampling for all sectors and all facilities, unless for some reason you can qualify for one of the waivers that's listed in the permit. And certain sectors also have their specific numeric effluent limit sampling requirements. And if it's a numeric effluent, which hazardous metals and certain sector-specific ones are, then if you exceed that discharge limit, then it's actually a violation of the permit. So be careful on that. And then if you are discharging to an impaired water body, you need to make sure that you are doing your water quality monitoring.
Okay, so Jennifer, so over the last 5 years, what have been the changes for the MSGP?
If I can get this to advanced slides quickly, I will tell you. There we go. Okay, so there are several definitions. They revised 2 and added 3 that were not there previously. They've added, for the impaired water definition, instead of just the existing 303D list of impaired water bodies, they've also added reference to the Texas Integrated Report Index and the 305B list. Basically just more ways to identify impaired water bodies when you're doing your NOI. They also, so they added these 3, infeasible, pollutant of concern, and benchmark that weren't there before. Infeasible, they use the term where feasible quite a bit in regard to BMPs and other requirements in the, excuse me, sorry about that, in the permit. And this definition just kind of helps clarify and define what may or may not be feasible according to this TXR5 permit. And then the benchmark definition just kind of gives a guidance on what they mean by benchmark, because they haven't had that definition in there previously. So then these items are some key general changes in the body of the permit. One of them is a clarification on above ground storage tanks, which generally are not considered exposed, but they put new language in this version of the permit to clarify that. Basically, the AST has to be physically separated from and not associated with vehicle maintenance operations to qualify. And there's no leaks from pipes, plumbing, of course, and any AST that dispenses fuel to vehicles that are used to support the facility are also not considered exposed. So just some clarifications there on that language. Training documentation, they added the actual phrase, I guess, attendance list is required to be kept as part of your training documentation. I guess there was some confusion on when the inspectors went out, they couldn't verify that training of all the employees was done, so we are now required to keep attendance lists in our documentation from training. And then they've added this electronic submittal of forms and reporting language in there. It specifies all the dates when your NOI, your NEC notice of your NEC, and all your reporting must be submitted online. By September 1st, 2017, all your NOIs and your no exposure certifications, they're going to have to be submitted using the e-permitting system, so through STEERS online through the TCEQ. You can request and receive a reporting waiver for that if you need to. Also, September 1st, 2017, any notice of change or notice of termination that you need to submit will have to be submitted through that e-permitting system, STEERS system. So then by December 21st, 2016, so into this year, all of the DMRs will have to be submitted through the TCEQ Net DMR system, which is already online. Again, you can request an electronic reporting waiver for your DMRs, and if you do so, then you'll send your paper DMRs to the Enforcement Division like you previously did. So there's a new electronic reporting dates there. For rain gauges, it's just kind of added some more clarification language. They're clarifying a lot this time. It says if there's no rain for a week, you shall monitor and record 0 rainfall total or no rain for the week. It's not really a new requirement, it's just actually specified in the body of the permit now. And the last piece here, the Endangered Species Act clarification. They added language saying listed endangered or threatened aquatic or aquatic dependent species, and that reference to aquatic was not there before. So I think it makes sense for a water permit. The benchmark sampling has been updated along with the definition that wasn't there previously. They have some clarification in there on where you actually take your sample. It's differentiating benchmark sampling from your representative sampling for numeric effluent monitoring, because your benchmark monitoring is intended to determine if your on-site BMPs are working. So they want you to take your benchmark samples from internal or external outfalls where your BMPs are installed, because your sample results from your benchmark sampling are used to prove or see if your benchmark or your BMPs are actually effective. Another thing they added was this violation language, which wasn't there previously. It actually specifies that if you don't conduct your benchmark sampling or if you don't submit your annual monitoring form with sample results or an explanation of why you couldn't take your sample, those are now considered a violation of the permit requirements. So that language is actually in the permit now. There are several changes to benchmark values, sector specific. So these first 4 here, they have a TSS drop. Originally they were at 100 milligrams per liter, they're now at 50. And that's based, the TCEQ says that's based on a statistical analysis of all the data that they've collected since 2011 from these sectors. Sectors K and S are seeing a drop in the ammonia nitrogen benchmark from 2.5 to 1.7, the same reasoning. And then Sector T here, they have reduced the biochemical oxygen demands benchmark from 30 milligrams per liter to 20 milligrams per liter. And then I noticed in there Sector J has added language to include access and haul roads as sources of stormwater as well. Along with the other list, there's a list in Sector J that says this is a source of stormwater, so they've added access and haul roads. Another update, and this is an EPA update that they did back in 2010, they updated the minimum analytical levels for your labs. That came into effect July 14th, 2014. So all the new renewals, all the new permit renewals are going to now require these new minimum analytical levels. So that's why it's included in this renewal. And it could affect your hazardous metals waiver if you're going for one of those.
Okay, Jennifer, so a couple of the questions that we've been getting, when is the new NOI due date, but what is the 2016 renewal timeline?
Okay, so as of right now, unless something crazy happens at the TCEQ, the existing permit will expire on August 13th of this year, and then the revised permit becomes effective August 14th. During that time, you will want to prepare and or update your SWIP depending on if you're applying for a new permit or renewing your old one, and you have a 90-day window after that renewal comes into effect. So from August 14th through November 13th of this year, you have that time to prepare your SWIP and submit your new notice of intent, or if you're doing a no exposure certification, submit a new one of those. And then just a little reminder, if you are not planning on renewing, if you've had a change of operations and you don't need a stormwater permit anymore, the last day to terminate coverage, if you're not renewing, to avoid the annual water quality fee, that annual $200 water quality fee, that is August 31st of this year.
So before I jump into conclusions, I just wanted to see if there are any other questions out there that people have, and we will go ahead and address those now. Obviously, we have quite a bit of time left. We ran through this pretty quick, so if there are specific questions that we didn't cover for your sectors or something, just feel free to give us a holler.
Yeah, Heather, I got a couple. What was the change to the no exposure language? I'm sorry, was there a change to the no exposure language?
There was. Jennifer, did you want to address that, or do you want me to jump in there?
Feel free to jump in. I know I addressed it from an AST standpoint, but feel free to expand on that.
Okay. So some of the things that I know have been clarified for that was a lot of the clarification on the language of the ASTs and when they qualify, and also based on, I'm trying to find the actual spots within the NOI for clarifying what NEC is, but the other things that got clarified or were clarified at least in the 2011, and also the permit definition for no exposure increased and actually starts qualifying what industrial materials or activities are that are included as part of no exposure. So basically, any of these activities, if they're exposed, you don't qualify for no exposure, and that's including things like material handling or equipment activities. We see a lot of that, industrial machinery, raw materials, intermediate products, byproducts, final products, and waste products. Material handling activities include storage, unloading, and loading practices and conveyance practices. So what we find a lot is that people move, they don't have a lot outside on a routine basis, but then they move stuff back and forth, and those materials are exposed during the time. Now, if it's like a closed sealed drum that doesn't have any residues on it, that's fine. That's still considered no exposure. But sometimes they'll have intermediate products or other kinds of products that aren't for outdoor storage that they're moving back and forth from, say, one building or area to another, and that can pull you into no exposure. So that's some of the definitional changes there.
I have another one. What purpose of keeping the requirement for an on-site rain gauge if the TCEQ removed the language about 1/10 of an inch as an indicator of qualifying storm events?
Jennifer, do you want to field that one, or do you want me to try to?
I honestly, Lance kind of broke up on that question, so I didn't get the whole
Okay,
thing. I'm
sorry.
sorry.
So what's the purpose of keeping the requirement for an on-site rain gauge if the TCEQ removed the language about 1/10 of an inch as an indicator of a qualifying storm event?
So I'll jump in. I was going to say, I'll jump in here with mine, and then Jennifer can jump in with her understanding of that. So based on my experience in dealing with inspectors when they show up at the facility and the whole rain gauge monitoring, and that it has to be on site, a lot of people are like, wait, I have an airport like a mile down the road. Why can't I use their weather radar system? And the take on that is that basically, especially within Texas, it can rain at your facility, and a quarter mile away, there's no rain at all. And the reason they do this is to kind of pin down that whole, we didn't get a sample this quarter, or we didn't get a sample this semi-annual benchmark period or whatever, because there was no discharge. So this is to some extent the ability to look at your rain gauge log, and the 1/10 of an inch may have gone away, and they recognize, and the reason they took the 1/10 of an inch monitoring requirement out of the regulations is because they know that for some sites a 1/10 of an inch will have discharge, and for a lot of sites a 1/10 of an inch is never going to result in a discharge. And so they took that requirement out. But if you have a rain gauge log and it shows that you had 2 inches of rain in 1 day period, and you didn't grab a sample, it's going to be an indicator as to maybe you should have, maybe there was probably discharge, and so they use it to that extent. And so on your rain gauge monitoring log, if you have a rain event and you didn't or couldn't collect a sample, then you have to make notes as to why you didn't or couldn't, so that they know whether or not you just were like, I don't feel like going out and grabbing a sample today, or you had qualifying rain events and just didn't collect a sample. And it's a difference between a violation or potential. So that's my understanding or take on why they still require a rain gauge log and use it kind of as an enforcement technique. You have anything to add, Jennifer?
No, I don't. That's what I was thinking. I know that, I mean, they may have taken that 1/10 of an inch out of the permit, but to me the rain gauge monitoring log is a whole separate piece of the permit, like you were just saying.
Okay.
And based on our experience, that's probably one of the easiest violations for them to find. And I've had inspectors sit down and go, I'm going to look through your log, and I'm going to look through your sample event, and if you grabbed a sample, you better have noted it on your rain gauge log, and there better have been a rain event that day. I mean, I've had them really go back and forth. So it's probably one of the things that a lot of inspectors pick on the most, because it's low-hanging fruit.
Okay, another question. What sectors are subject to lowered metal detection limits?
Heather, I may be wrong, but I don't think there were any drops in the actual metal detection limits. It was the minimum analytical levels for the lab that are lowered. Is that right?
Right, which is the same thing. If I understand it right, they have to meet a minimum level. And I don't know. I didn't do a cross comparison between which mal got reduced and which didn't, and I didn't see that in the fact sheet either. Did you?
I did. There are 2 that were not lowered.
So, do you know which 2?
Not off the top of my head. I'm sorry. It is in the fact sheet there. They specify which 2 were not lowered.
So, yeah. So, Jennifer, if you want to look for that real quick so we can finish answering that question. I don't know if you have that handy to be able to make that.
I can answer it after we're done, for sure. We can reply later.
Okay. Sounds good.
And one more question, or 2 more questions. Please clarify coverage for regular trash compactors.
So that's one of the, in the no exposure certification, the compactor question is really a hard one, and it's a definite gray area because, and it's one of those things that really, if you have them, you should read through the guidance documents. But so if you have a lidded dumpster and you keep it closed and you don't have trash and debris around it, and there's no way when they dump the dumpster into the trash truck that stuff's going to go flying around. That's how you qualify for no exposure for a trash dumpster. You have to make sure the lids get kept closed. So that's the language. In practicality, that's probably really hard to meet. But for the most part, I haven't had an inspector come back and say, you don't meet NEC specifically for that as long as your dumpsters have lids. Now, if you look at your dumpsters and they have holes and they're beat up and they're dented and there are no lids to them, then they do not qualify for NEC. The compactor is a little bit more of a challenge because there's some language in the no exposure certification that talks about the fact that no trash can escape during loading and unloading, and that trash compactors have to be within a storm-resistant shelter to be able to qualify. And that has to do with the fact that when you pull a trash compactor away from the compacting unit on the wall, stuff falls out. It's almost impossible for it not to fall out. And I routinely, when I do inspections, will see bits and debris under the compactor and under that unit, so that there's always seems to be stuff under compactors. And I think that's what the TCEQ is getting at, with compactors have to be covered and in a storm-resistant shelter. And so that makes it really hard to qualify for NEC if you have a trash compactor. So that's just something to go back and really kick the tires in that guidance document, the RG 467, I think it was, and make sure that you qualify for all those caveats. But it's probably one of the things that they're trying to get stricter on.
Okay, a couple more questions come in. I think we have time to ask. What are the timelines for the collecting benchmarks and annual samples for the permit? We already did annuals under the existing permit, and we did one benchmark sample. Do we wait until January 2017 for both annual collection and benchmarks under this revised permit? Whew.
I want to say yes. Usually the permit references the next full calendar year for the next sampling cycle.
Right. So that's basically how it is. It's the next full period, and so that it will become effective whatever it is. So if you've already done your annual hazardous metals, you don't have to recollect them in 2016. You'll just collect them in 2017 and compare them to the 2017 rules, or the new permit rules.
Okay, and is the rain gauge recording still listed as once per week?
I believe they've clarified once per week when you have zero rain, and then when you do have rain, you have to record the days that you have rain.
Okay. On large sites like coal mines, how do we assure that we have the correct placement and correct number of rain gauges?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you had an experience with that. Most of my sites have been small, and we usually stick to one, so I'll let you field that one.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we have seen. Is they're usually at the headquarters, but you're right, they can be miles apart. So if you are seeing that you have a rain gauge log, say at your headquarter facility or your maintenance facility, and you have an outfall discharging 4 or 5 miles away that is considered one of your sampling outfalls, it might be worthwhile to have a monitoring rain gauge over in that region as well, just to be able to clarify the difference between whether or not you're discharging or not. But I haven't seen any guidance that says one way or the other on that, but I would think that if you are experiencing variable rainfall across a large region, that you probably would want to have multiple rain gauges, and preferably in the regions where near your monitoring locations.
Okay. You guys might have already answered this question, but I just want to ask one more time just to be safe. Will permit holders have to perform benchmark samplings twice in 2016? Example, once before the permit expiration and once again after the permit coverage.
No, you won't have to do that. You get to wait till the next full calendar year to start over with your sampling. So even though the new permit will be in effect at the end of this year, you don't have to start sampling again until 2017.
Okay, we're down to 2. Where can we get the guidance on the trash compactor?
We'll be happy to email that to you, not a problem, or you can just Google TCEQ RG 467.
Okay. And okay, so this is from a previous inspector interpretation. So it's on compactors. So compactors on property subject to the permit due to SIC were themselves subject to the permit and had to be under a roof. Compactors on property with no applicable SIC or activity codes were not subjected to the permit, i.e. the compactors in one place could be exposed to rain and the compactors elsewhere could not. Has this changed?
Can you read that again, Lance? I think I'm understanding the question,
Sure.
but I mean, maybe not.
Okay, so so compactors on property subject to the permit due to SIC were themselves subject to the permit and had to be under a roof. Compactors on property with no applicable SIC or activity codes were not subject to the permit, i.e. the compactors in one place could not be exposed to rain and the compactors elsewhere could not. Has this changed?
So the answer to that is no, that hasn't changed. And if I'm understanding the question properly, essentially this whole compactor concept, under this MSGP, first of all, the MSG has to apply to you. And so if you are within one of the subject SIC codes or within one of the activity sectors or whatever, but if the MSGP applies to you, then the compactor NEC exposure question will apply to you. However, if you're at, say, a shopping center where this is not an industrial facility and you aren't subject to the Industrial Multi-Sector General Permit, then that whole compactor discussion goes away because you're not subject to it here. You may be subject to other rules, but you're not subject to this particular permit. Hopefully that answered the question.
I very well could have just butchered that question too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the question and send it to you, and then if I misinterpreted the question, then we can email him later on. And then I just wanted to let everybody know that yes, we will be sending out this presentation afterwards. So as soon as we get it downloaded, we'll be sending that an email to you this afternoon. So with that, Heather, I think we're ready for the conclusion.
Okay. So basically it gets back to, it becomes effective on August 14th. Don't forget that that's when it becomes effective. You can get copies of the MSGP, and it's supposed to be presented to the executive director, I think, on the 20th, actually the 6th of July. So you should have an available copy, so you may be able to get started on your SWIP updates, assuming that you want to. Otherwise, you have 90 days to update your stormwater plan and get your NEC filed or your notice of intent filed by November 13th. But you can always jump ahead on that if you would like. And make sure you understand how the changes affect your stormwater plan and your site-specific activities. Depending on your sector, we didn't cover all the sectors and every change within those sectors because it would have been a long dissertation that we didn't think was what everybody wanted to hear, so we covered the high points. But make sure that you go back and read through your sector-specific stuff and make sure that you are abiding by those changes. So that's kind of, wrapping it up. You just make sure also some of the things that we've seen going forward, going in inspections and stuff, is that you need to make sure that you are maintaining your SWIP, making the changes to it as your site changes and configures over 5 years. Most of them do. Make sure you are making your changes to your stormwater plan and keeping them up to date, and that you're doing your routine inspections and monitoring as you need to do them.
Okay, I think that does it. Jennifer, do you have anything to add, or we good?
I think we are good.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for spending your lunch hour with us, and I know that by the response, it was a very hot topic, and I think you answered a lot of questions. So I also want to remind everybody that we are going to have our webinar in July. It's going to be on vapor mitigation. So Frank Clark is going to be hosting it on July 28th. And you can see how you can register for that webinar. If not, you can always email me at lfrench@wh-m.com. Just want to thank you guys for spending your lunch hour with us, and you guys have a great day.